Now on BBC Radio 4, the author and historian Glenn Mitchell explores the lasting appeal of the 1960s television serial The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe and examines the impact of its popular music score and how close the series came to extinction in Robinson Crusoe, Rescued Again.
It's 5 p.m. on Tuesday the 12th of October 1965. I'm 6 years old, though I admit I don't sound it, and I arrived home from school less than an hour ago. Unburdened by homework, and long before the distraction of DVDs, I do what most youngsters did at that time and settle down in front of the black and white television set. In this case, a model capable of receiving 405 and 625 lines, which my dad had bought the year before so we could get BBC Two. Though still in monochrome, this youthful medium defies its critics by presenting to children a wider world of entertainment, current affairs, and some truly classic adventure.
This is BBC One. In 25 minutes, Jeremy Carrad looks at the modern world in our new magazine programme, Tom Tom. Before that, we turn to the past in the first episode of a new adaptation of Daniel Defoe's classic novel, Robinson Crusoe.
That theme, which evokes so many childhood memories, heralded each instalment of The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, as it was titled on screen, the famous story of an Englishman who survives a shipwreck, then lives alone on a desert island. In its many versions, it remains a favourite adventure with adults and children alike. My own fascination with this TV adaptation, and its memorable score, has resulted all these years later in my own quest to discover the programme's origins and how, despite TV's appalling tendency to destroy its own heritage, the series managed to survive. During the course of my journey, I've unearthed some fascinating tales from one of the composers of that marvellous score.
So I did everything in 1 week. And to be honest, I don't even remember as I could do it.
And learned how the series was rescued, in authentic Crusoe fashion, by one of the hero's own countrymen.
We found ourselves in this lock-up with all these rusty cans of film.
So, I hope you'll come aboard with me, Glenn Mitchell, for the next half hour as I reveal how Robinson Crusoe was rescued again. The title theme to Robinson Crusoe is remembered affectionately by many, in particular those who were British schoolchildren between 1965 and 1981. It's been requested several times on Radio 4's Desert Island Discs.
Tell me about your first record for your desert island.
Well, my first record is the theme from the TV series The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, which always seemed to be on in the school holidays when I was a kid.
I absolutely adored this. I can't describe how much I did. It just transported me away to a place that I so wanted to be at since I was about 5 years old. And I love this music with a passion.
Explorer Pen Hadow, and before him, vocalist Jarvis Cocker. Those of a later generation have sometimes encountered the music by less direct means. Elbow frontman and radio presenter Guy Garvey.
I loved the art of noise. I loved what they did with sound. And most of the stuff was early sample technology. It was ping-pong balls or motor engines, and then in the middle of one of the records that was typically made up of all these real-life sounds turned into music was a very faithful, beautiful piece of woodwind music. The first thing I noticed about it was there was very, very little of their trademark sampling going on. They obviously just really loved the piece of music, so it made me scrutinise it a little bit, and I became really fond of it. The nobility of being alone on a desert island, it gives you all those things that people love about the castaway situation. So even though I never saw the TV series, I'm not old enough, I'm very happy to say, to remember it, that piece of music in itself encapsulates everything that I love about the romance of being a castaway.
Although people of Guy Garvey's generation have their own favourites to look back on, I do feel fortunate to have been around for that golden period of television in the 60s, when children had things ranging from the pre-Python series Do Not Adjust Your Set to the foreign-made adaptations of classic tales dubbed into English that BBC One routinely scheduled in the weekday tea time slot. Composer Mark Ayres.
From America we had Champion the Wonder Horse and Casey Jones and the Cannonball Express. And then from Europe we had a number of these programmes, Robinson Crusoe, The Flashing Blade, and we loved them. They were fantastic, and I think one of the things about them was they seemed slightly exotic because they were dubbed.
This version of Robinson Crusoe, in 13 25-minute episodes, was a French production in association with German TV. It was directed by Jean Sacha and produced by Henry Deutschmeister of Franco London Films, who just over a decade before had filmed a desert island story with two other lifelong heroes of mine, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy.
We're on an island, take a peep! I'm too puffed to peep. Here's a man that was shipwrecked, and he did all right. Listen. Robinson Crusoe was born in the city of York. His father wanted him to become a lawyer, but young Crusoe longed to go to sea.
The Laurel and Hardy film, known variously as Atoll K, Utopia or Robinson Crusoe Land, possibly influenced the later decision to make Crusoe the first in a series of classic serials that went on to include Don Quixote, Treasure Island, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and The Last of the Mohicans. Each was originally made in 4 90-minute parts, in which form the English version of Crusoe is believed to have been syndicated to American TV in 1964. The use of a Paris-based American, Lee Payant, to dub both the narration and the voice of Crusoe suggests they were aiming this more at the United States than Great Britain. When watching that first episode, I didn't give too much thought to Payant's European-influenced American tones, as the hero spent his first night on the island in a baobab, or, as Payant pronounces it, baobab tree.
I'm going to try to perch on one of the huge horizontal branches of this baobab tree. It won't be a very secure shelter. If I can climb up there, the ferocious animals can do so too.
I wasted no time in using the word baobab the following day at school. Also watching that first transmission was Lawrence Marcus of the website Television Heaven.
What you have to remember is that television was still very much in its infancy, even in 1965. A lot of the people I knew, myself included, hadn't even been to the seaside. So actually to be transported to this tropical island had a big impact. And the wonderful thing about the narrative of Robinson Crusoe is that you're discovering something new as he's discovering something new as the series unfolds. And that really had the hook for the series for somebody of my age, I think.
As soon as Crusoe begins to survey the island, the incidental music is there to influence our reaction to what's happening. Mark Ayres again.
And the first thing that happens when he washes up on the desert island is that some of his dead comrades from the ship also wash up next to him. It's not incredibly uplifting as a series for much of it, but the music is. And I think it's about positive attitude in adversity, which the music conveys in spades. If you listen to the main theme track, it's very positive, it's very up, it's quite fast, there's a drum track and a nice jaunty bass line. And then later on in the album we use a cue called Poor Robinson, which is exactly the same piece of music but just played on strings. And it's suddenly a very sad piece and a very reflective. It's a wonderful illustration of how music just in different moods can catch you in different moods, the same melody played in a different way. I certainly learnt a lot listening to it again about orchestration personally in terms of my professional career. Just a simple twist of instrumentation, tempo, etc. can really change the feel of a piece of music and really affect the way you perceive what you're watching. I would love to see White Horses again.
On white horses, let me ride away.
I did love the theme tune for that. It just really made them compulsive viewing, I think, even though we willingly watched them over and over again.
Just as the White Horses appealed primarily to girls, so Robinson Crusoe was essentially a tale of adventure for boys, though their sisters, or at least the older ones, tended to notice the handsome Austrian actor playing the lead, Robert Hoffmann.
A blonde, suntanned, muscular, what you would call these days hunk, probably encouraged a lot of female viewers and a few mothers perhaps to sit down and watch the series with their children as well.
We'd hoped to speak to Robert Hoffmann for this programme, but, true to both his and Crusoe's spirit, he's presently globe-trotting, his current whereabouts seemingly unknown. Fortunately, I was able to track down recordings of radio and television interviews Hoffmann gave in the late 90s, which revealed that he'd only recently left acting school when he obtained the role.
My agent called me and said, well, go to see Mr. Deutschmeister, Franco London Films, Champs-Élysées. Walked into the office and Deutschmeister said, you.
In a 1997 BBC radio interview, Hoffmann described the communal atmosphere of filming on location in the Canary Islands and what subsequently became of the place.
It was my family then for 6 months on the island. I went back 15 years ago, and I didn't recognize my beaches, my huts, my palm trees, and everything was changed. It was just concrete walls.
When you were filming the series, did you live the life of Robinson Crusoe?
Oh yes, absolutely, because there was nothing around. We lived in Las Palmas, and the whole day we were out in nature, and it was very nice. There was nothing to eat. There was a little hut where we got fried rice and fried banana and an egg sunny side up down, and that's what we ate. You know, there was no catering service. There were no machines. There were no electric light. It was only the sun sheets that reflected, and a good cameraman, which was Quinto Albicoco. He was a genius.
Given that Crusoe is usually depicted as a middle-aged British bulldog type, the choice of a young Germanic-looking actor may seem surprising. Yet, according to Daniel Defoe's novel, Crusoe is only 27 when shipwrecked, and his father is a German émigré from Bremen, whose original surname, Kreuznach, was anglicised to Crusoe by the locals when he settled first in Hull, then in York. The Salzburg-born Hoffmann speaks several languages and, although there was again a narrator, delivered his own dialogue in the French version.
J'attends vos ordres. Eh bien, puisque je ne puis rien faire d'autre, je vous forcerai...
More surprising is that the French soundtrack carried entirely different music, written by Georges Van Parys. Work on the English version was already nearing completion when Franco London, seeking a new score, brought in a then British-based songwriter, Robert Mellin, and a young Italian composer and conductor, Giampiero Reverberi. Mellin, who's fondly remembered for 50s and 60s hits that include an added lyric to Akerbilk's Stranger on the Shore, passed away in 1994. But Reverberi is still working and was more than happy to recall the Crusoe project when he spoke to me from his home in Genoa.
Franco London was producing the Robinson Crusoe, and so when they tried through Mr. Mellin to sell the production, the episodes, to the television in England, they found some let's say, shock people, because they said, well, it's an English romance, an English writer, an English story, and it doesn't have anything to do with French accordion and waltzes, musette, and this kind of music. So they said, we don't buy it if we don't change the music.
Some of the arrangements incorporate percussion effects of beach pebbles and sounds similar to tropical birds. When I asked Reverberi about the sessions, he remembered some percussion effects, but his recollection was scant, and with good reason.
Everything was already done. It was edited, there is no any way to change anything, and I had just 1 week to do everything because they were in a hurry. So I didn't have that much time to think about it. So I did everything in 1 week, and to be honest, I don't even remember as I could do it.
1 week? I had no idea. With no way of knowing that that's an outrageous schedule to impose on an artist.
It was always that kind of job with them, because they considered the music the last, let's say, important thing in the project, and so they didn't care that
much. The score as a whole combines the maritime idiom of the late 17th and early 18th centuries with some very 1960s influences. In more recent years, Giampiero Reverberi has enjoyed considerable success with a recognisably similar project, Rondo Veneziano.
Rondo Veneziano was an Italian sort of rock classical group, and they sort of reimagined Vivaldi for the 20th century.
Some 25 years after the original transmissions, finding the music from the series, or at least the main title theme, had become, for many people, almost as vital as Crusoe's initial search for food and shelter on the island. By then, the survival of usable tapes of the score seemed unlikely, but one person who hoped otherwise was David West, who today runs a website dedicated to the series.
I had known that there was a vinyl, a 45 RPM vinyl many years ago, but I couldn't track one down. So one evening I heard the theme tune on the television, and it was Frank Bruno, and he was on a desert island surrounded by baked beans, and that started me off. I thought, well, if that music can be played on an advert, it must have been on a tape or a CD or something somewhere at some point in time. And I wrote to HB Foods actually in 1990, and they said that there's not a record available, but there would be plans for one in the future. And a bit later on I wrote to the BBC because I vaguely remembered it being on BBC TV in the 60s. And they said that there was a record out. This was 1991, and I was able to purchase the very first CD.
The original CD was drawn from copies of session tapes retained by Robert Mellin. Several years later, an extended version of the disc became possible when Tim Beddoes of Network Video, who we'll be hearing from later, discovered additional tapes of the music while seeking film material in Paris. The complicated task of mastering the new CD went to Mark Ayres.
I was working for Silver Screen Records in the 90s, doing numerous cover versions of film themes for all the various film music albums they were releasing. And I'd obviously lapped up their Robinson Crusoe disc when they released it in 1990. So a few years later, when these additional tapes turned up, they came to me and said, well, would you be interested in putting this together? And I absolutely jumped at the chance. My job was to go through those tapes, try and work out what the original cues were, and reassemble them so that we could have the best representation of the music as it was originally written.
This track, called Adrift, was on the B-side of the 60s single mentioned earlier by David West. I've long thought it one of the most effective themes ever written for conveying the idea of a vessel cutting its way through the ocean at speed. Mark Ayres agrees.
A driving, exciting track, and it's more to do with travel, really, I think, boats driving through the water. The tenseness of the slave trade and buccaneering on the high seas.
Adrift features prominently in the scene where Crusoe, aware of cannibals visiting his island, decides to rescue one of their intended victims, who of course becomes the companion he names Friday, after the day on which they met. Lawrence Marcus again.
When he rescues Friday, instead of making Friday his companion, he actually makes him his slave.
Me, master. You are Friday.
The story is ultimately a journey into enlightenment. By the end, Friday at least appears to have something like equal status.
It's good to note that, in parallel with the story, the friendship between Robert Hoffmann and Fabian Canalos, who plays Friday, endures to this day. Robert Hoffmann, speaking by telephone to BBC Radio West Midlands in 1997.
I'm still a very good friend of Fabian, who played Friday, and now he's a photographer in Paris, working for Sigma and writing books and things like that.
It's only the influence of Friday, who proves himself much the better man, that may have modified Crusoe's attitude to slavery. Crusoe is himself made a slave when captured off the North African coast, and yet, as a planter in Brazil following his escape, can still be persuaded to embark on an illegal slave-seeking mission to Africa, during which he is shipwrecked. This subject has, of course, always been sensitive, and in these present times, so might be the scenes in which Crusoe is smoking and drinking, sometimes to excess.
I am definitely not drunk. I'm walking perfectly straight.
It must also be said that the series includes an enormous number of violent deaths. Given that the DVD edition carries a PG certificate, would the programme be scheduled for children today? David West.
The Robinson Crusoe series wasn't any worse than the cowboys and Indians shooting each other, and there was plenty of those on the television in those days. You could do a body count of the dead Indians in lots and lots of cowboy and Indian films.
The subject of slavery, highly topical when Defoe's novel was published in 1719, was one of many embellishments to the tale originally told to him by Scottish mariner Alexander Selkirk, originally Selcraig, whom the author met in Bristol. Selkirk had spent more than 4 years alone on the island of Juan Fernandez, off the coast of Chile, and though the book retains some basic details, not least a heavy reliance on goats for sustenance, Selkirk wasn't even shipwrecked, but was put ashore at his own request. Nor were there cannibals, a companion such as Friday, or mutineers to conquer as a means of catching a ship home. While Selkirk was marooned off the southwest coast of South America, Defoe suggests Crusoe's island lies to the northeast, close to Trinidad. It's been suggested, incidentally, that Defoe, an enterprising man, relocated the story to the West Indies because he was involved in promoting the region to the British. For all its popularity, few copies of the novel surface in second-hand bookshops, and those that do are frequently adapted for children. On the strength of the TV series, I attempted to read a version as a child, but found it disappointing. As an adult, I read the original novel, and my opinion remained unchanged. Crusoe's first-person narrative is heavily inclined to repetition of statement and over-detail in minor matters.
Besides this barley, there was, as above, 20 or 30 stalks of rice, which I preserved with the same care, and whose use was of the same kind or to the same purpose, viz. To make me bread, or rather food, for I found ways to cook it up without baking, though I did that also after some time. But to return to my journal.
All this, yet he fails to give us the name of the ship that went down, those of the sea captains who initially trained him, saved his life at sea, and eventually got him home, or even of his dog, whose death, by the way, instead of being the pivotal tragedy we expect, is mentioned only as an incidental detail long after the event. He does at least tell us that the parrot is called Poll.
Oh, Robin!
It also seems fair to suggest that the novel's strengths may lie in its events, rather than the way in which they're told, and in inviting others to follow Defoe's example in adapting and embellishing the tale, as has been done with later works ranging from The Swiss Family Robinson to Lord of the Flies, via The Admirable Crichton and many others. As author and critic Dame Gillian Beer observed in 1996...
In the 19th century, I think Robinson Crusoe is almost entirely a children's story, and it's there alongside Treasure Island and The Swiss Family Robinson. And then those begin to intervene, so that by the time you get, say, to William Golding, his retellings of Robinson Crusoe are also retellings of Treasure Island, the Coral Island.
When billing the TV series on its first week, Radio Times defended its French origins in this manner.
In this country, poor old Robinson Crusoe has suffered a strange fate. He's become a character in a nursery rhyme, played in the pantomime by a pretty girl. In France, Robinson Crusoe has long been as popular as in his home country, but the Crusoe they know and love is the authentic one.
Any screen adaptation inevitably has a responsibility to itself as well as to its source, and for many of us the 1960s series remains the definitive screen presentation. Definitive or not, it was, like Crusoe himself, very nearly lost. After a final BBC screening in 1981, it went the way of numerous black and white programmes in an era when colour had become standard. Into oblivion, most probably via a skip. I hadn't watched the series for some time, in the way young adults have of leaving behind the things they enjoyed in childhood through fear that they might now seem embarrassing. I'd got over that by the 90s, when people knowing of my interest in classic film and TV asked me if the series was available on video. There seemed to be no trace of it, but by that time, fortunately, someone was on the trail. Tim Beddoes of Network Video.
I had an idea to set up a new video label which specialised in the unusual, the overlooked, or whatever was perceived to be lost at the time, and Crusoe was there right at the very top, because it's one of those shows that everyone remembers the theme. You know, all my contemporaries, they all remember the music. That's probably one of the highlights of the shows, and because it hadn't been on for so long, that's what set me off searching for it. And I thought, if we're going to set this business up, then we need a good, strong title to kick it off with, and Crusoe was it.
Tracing the owners was one thing, but obtaining the film materials themselves was quite another.
There was this little company in Paris called Télé10. A contract was drawn up, and then there were all these cans of film waiting for me at their offices in Paris. And I started looking through, but there was at least one episode missing.
Crusoe only had to deal with cannibals and mutineers, but Tim had to face Parisian drivers.
And they were giving us directions of where to go to this suburb of Paris, rush hour, on a Friday evening. And we found ourselves in this lock-up with all these rusty cans of film. And it was me doing most of the physical work, as I recall, but I eventually did find this missing episode, with the bonus as well, because we found the music tapes as well, which we ultimately gave to Marquez. These unique prints were entrusted to us, and we've sold tens of thousands of it. I can't emphasise this enough. It has played such an important part in where I am now, personally.
Having established how Crusoe was rescued for a second time, what of the people behind the series? Producer Henry Deutschmeister, director Jean Sacha, and English narrator Lee Payant have long since passed to other shores. With composer Robert Mellin also gone, it was left to his colleague, Jean-Pierre Reverberi, to tell me what he feels about the revival of the music today. My question brought an amusing postscript.
My score I didn't heard anymore since after the recording. 25 years ago, something like that, in Florence, the new arrangement, because it was used for a fashion, let's say, fashion performance. And while the girls were presenting the new dressing, I heard this theme. And I said, I had this experience, I heard it, I said, this is familiar, nice, beautiful arrangement, fantastic, but what is it? And then I remember that was my theme, was the Robinson theme. So that was the last time I heard something.
Robert Hoffmann has enjoyed a long and successful career in German and French productions for TV and film, reappearing occasionally in the English-speaking market in Val Guest's 1968 film Assignment K, the 1980 war drama The Sea Wolves, starring Gregory Peck, Roger Moore and David Niven, and in the TV series Dallas. Off-screen, his life has continued to be one of travel and adventure, including a period living an island existence in the Dominican Republic.
I went to Santo Domingo, and we found a place which was absolutely deserted. We went there only with hammocks and axes and pants and lived there really like in the ancient days of the world.
I'm leaving my island, but with great regret. I arrived there a rash young man full of arrogance. I'm leaving with a sense of peace and fulfillment.
So, what else did I find on my journey? Aside from my disappointment in the book, I learned that the music loved by so many almost didn't happen, and that in the end it took only a week to produce. That it's considered cool even among rock musicians. That many seek out that music and the program itself through numerous websites. That the series vanished with the final episode remaining tantalizingly the last to resurface. And that its recovery became the foundation of a successful business. All this, and the knowledge that Robert Hoffmann is as intrepid an explorer as Crusoe himself, whose story continues to be told and retold. But those of us who were children in the 1960s and 70s will always think of the TV serial and its superb score. The efforts of dedicated archivists have ensured that they will remain more than just a pleasant memory. Thanks for listening.
Robinson Crusoe Rescued Again was written and presented by Glenn Mitchell and produced in Manchester by Stephen Garner.